Standard Open of 2015. We're going to have a champion here in a couple hours. Will it be Jim Davis? Will it be Chris Andersen? Well, we'll have to find out as things are underway here. Opulent Palace to start off here for Chris. A Temple of Enlightenment here for Jim.
Also settle in because these are the two slowest decks, in my opinion, in the entire top 8.
I think we got a little bit of time in front of us here. We thought about featuring the Heroic Mirror, but we knew that one would be over pretty quickly.
Yep.
Dave's going to play an island. He will pass the turn back over to Andersen. Andersen's mana, not an issue. We'll tap 3 mana, play a Courser. Jim going to look at his hand. You see a Disdainful Stroke over there. We know he has access to Nullify in his deck, but doesn't have one right now. So Davis will draw a card. Copy of Temple of Enlightenment is what he's picked up. See his hand, plenty of lands over there. Does have a copy of Jace's Ingenuity, a Dissolve as well. And he's going to go with a Flooded Strand and simply pass the turn back. We'll go back Andersen's way. Top card here for Chris is a Plains. He will put that into play. Time to flip over the top card, which is a copy of Sandstep Citadel. In for 2, he's going to come. Davis going to go down to 18.
Now, keep in mind, deck lists are public here in the top 8, so Jim knows when he counters something or kills something, he's done with it. There's no Whip of Erebos, there's no recursion he has to concern himself with.
It's a good feeling to have.
As such, you may see Jim be a little bit more aggressive with counters because there's no big trump he has to save them for. He can evaluate every threat at its face value and not have to worry about what the implications are of putting it into the graveyard and then not being able to fight over something like Whip of Erebos down the line.
Jim going to search up an island here with his Flooded Strand. So down to 17 he's going to go. And I have a feeling we may see a Dissolve here on the Siege Rhino. And it will be the 3-mana counterspell. A little scry action here for Davis in just a moment. Divination is the top card. Hard to pass that one up.
And you may wonder, why didn't Jim use the Disdainful Stroke, the more narrow counterspell? The answer is, there's nothing that costs less than 4 mana that Jim is going to counter this game. Maybe some copies of Thoughtseize at the most, and he'd rather keep the cheaper counterspell for somewhere down the line where his mana is a bit more taxed.
Temple of Enlightenment, little scry action there. Chris's draw was a copy of Sandstep Citadel, so he's going to put that into play. He'll gain a life, of course. And serve in here for 2 points of damage. Davis is going to go down to 15. And now here's a Siege Rhino yet again. Davis looking at Disdainful Stroke. You see the Jace's Ingenuity, you see the Divination, and a couple lands there as well. See if he wants to use a counterspell here.
I really like countering the Siege Rhino because it just sets the stage next turn for Jim to be able to resolve Jace's Ingenuity on a relatively stable board.
See what land Jim wants to play. Again, does have access to Island or Radiant Fountain as far as untapped lands are concerned. Drew a Tranquil Cove for the turn, but he's back up to 17. And what this does is undo an attack there from the Courser. Radiant Fountain, pretty powerful in the deck, as long as it's, you're not first couple of lands, because you don't want to colorless land until the middle or later stages of the game, excuse me. But it certainly looks good now.
And Jim wants to play that now because with the Jace's Ingenuity in his draw step, he might draw value lands, Tranquil Coves, and Temple of Enlightenments the rest of the way, and may get stuck with the Radiant Fountain in his hand. So at this point, he doesn't need the island. He can hold that back. He can make the land drop later if he wants to, but in the event that he just keeps drawing Radiant Fountains, Tranquil Coves, and Temple of Enlightenments, he doesn't want to get stuck with that card in his hand.
And there's an attack for 2. Here's a Satyr Wayfinder. Couple of cards coming.
Now, Chris is generating a fair amount of card advantage here. The problem is that it's pretty easy for Jim to undo all of this.
Here's Jace's Ingenuity. And now it's time to draw a card. There's Flooded Strand.
Magic players, we have 2 spots remaining in a standard win box. If you want to play standard,
You just get the impression that it's going to be hard for Chris to cobble together enough pressure while playing around and hostilities. He may have to choose between one or the other.
2 people come here, we'll fire that off immediately.
He may just have to ignore any hostilities in this matchup.
And we have 3 spots remaining in Commander. So if you want to play Commanders, the last chance to do so, please come up to the stage and sign up.
There's an Opulent Palace. Now here's an attack. So it's just, the whittling away here is all that Chris can really do because the big spells just aren't going to resolve.
Or it plays into end hostilities. That's the squeeze he's in right now. And now with that Courser no longer in play, Chris has basically no action and really needs to follow up.
Yeah, Last Breath taking care of that. It's just really, you can just tell the texture of the matchup is really tough for Chris because Jim can just, go just kind of just one for one answer a bunch. Or, in a situation like this where Chris plays a big spell, he can just cast in hostilities and just kind of reset the board again. It just seems very, very tough for Chris to ever really get any footing.
Now, Jim has some vulnerabilities here. His hand is a little bit heavy on lands. Right now, he can only draw cards. He has Dig Through Time and Divination, so. There is some hope from Chris's side that Jim may just not be able to answer this.
Jim going to sacrifice Flooded Strand. There's an island.
And there's a chance you'll see Dig Through Time here in response to the Soul of Theros because Nullify is one of his answers. And he has 6 cards in his graveyard currently to get the full discount on Dig Through Time. Jim has a lot of looks at it, but he does need to find them. Either that or end hostility, some sort of answer.
Well, it's time to go digging. Take a look at the top 7. Of course, 2 will come. Let's see what Jim's able to find here. And hostilities is certainly one that looks pretty nice.
Nullify also quite attractive.
Yeah. And this is his deck just firing on all cylinders at this point.
Yeah, Divination left over. Nothing's guaranteed. Jim's deck plays a lot of lands, and there's a risk he can flood out. But so far, things are kind of going according to script.
Yeah, and there's no revelation here, of course. Nothing like what we used to see.
No wins on the house.
Yeah.
You gotta actually work.
Which he's done a nice job of over the course of these 15 rounds. Soul's going to make it into combat. Or make it into play, excuse me. We're going to go back Jim's way. Jim going to draw a card, Radiant Fountain. There's a Flooded Strand. I'll search up with Plains.
And Chris just not with a lot of leftovers at this point.
Yeah.
Siege Rhino, but
There's end hostilities.
this is the problem for Chris at least game 1. He just does not have a lot of different angles of attack. And his deck is not particularly fast.
Things will change after sideboard, of course, but as you mentioned, this is the big issue of game 1. Chris also has a lot of dead draws. Lands in this situation, Elvish Mystic, Satyr, Wayfinder, even Courser's not especially good either.
Yeah, removal spells. There's not a lot of substance left. And this is with Chris having found 3 of his 4 Siege Rhinos this game as well. One of his more substantial cards.
And there's Nullify to take care of that. And there's Satyr, Wayfinder now. So a couple of cards, Soul Theros among them. There's a Plains, there's a Sidisi, and there's a Sylvan Caryatid. So Plains will go to hand, the rest will go to the bin. And even there, Satyr Wayfinder does its job in finding a land, but it also turns over some threats. 1 less Soul of Theros, 1 less Sidisi.
Yeah, the major incentive, this deck wants to make its land drops, of course, and then Soul of Theros being flipped over is extremely valuable in most matchups, but this is an exception, because Jim's going to do a pretty good job of preventing Chris from ever getting much of a board going.
Rudy Briscoe does win game number 1 here over Matt Andersen. Briscoe playing Abzan Reanimator, Andersen playing red-white tokens. Briscoe, your number 1 overall seed. It's been a dominant run for him. And he's certainly continuing that up a game here over red-white tokens. You see Davis resolving a Divination, drawing a couple more cards, getting deeper into his deck.
Yeah, Nullify plus and hostilities, some nice cards to pick up.
At this point, it feels like Jim's just looking for a way to close it out now. Life total's pretty high. feels pretty good about things.
At this point, Chris has, he's kind of done nothing for long enough that I think Jim can sense he's probably running very light on cards that matter. That's also a consequence of his deck. Jim knows that there just isn't a lot left that matters.
There's an attack from 1. Davis going to go down to 11. Andersen does have a copy of Wingmate Rock in hand. Going to play Windswept Heath. There is the Rock. Dave's going to consult his hand, but he does have a copy of Hostilities there, so probably doesn't mind too much if that makes it into play, and he doesn't. Going to sacrifice Evolving Wilds in the meantime.
And this leaves Jim essentially with Nullify against Chris with nothing, and their draw steps competing with each other, and Jim's draws at this stage are much better than Chris's. Things still not completely hopeless for Chris, as again, Jim does not have any free wins in his deck. He's going to have to, slog through some draw steps here, although Dig Through Time is very helpful.
As it oftentimes is.
But the door is closing for Chris, and Chris is aware of that too.
Oh, you can just feel it.
Yeah.
If we can feel it here in the booth, you guys can probably feel it at home. You have to imagine Chris can feel it as he's playing the game. You let my Wingmate Rock resolve and you have all those cards in your hand, well, I probably know what's coming. There's the Hostilities to clear everything up. Chris will draw a card. I think he just has lands in hand now. So he'll play a Windswept Heath. I imagine all he can do is just simply pass the turn back. Perhaps he has some small green creature to play, but Jim won't mind. This is a Dig Through Time. And now Jim's on the hunt for Pearl-Linked Ancient or Elspeth. 3 copies of Elspeth, 1 of the Leviathan. Joe Lissette does win game number 1 over Logan Mize. Lissette was on the play in the white-blue Heroic Mirror, and that might be the most important thing there.
Yeah, I am guessing that's going to be 2-1 in favor of Joe. If someone breaks serve, I would be stunned. Not impossible, but I would be stunned.
Tranquil Cove will allow Davis to gain a little bit of life. We'll head back Andersen's way. He'll play Yavimaya and just pass the turn back. He'll go Digging Through Time yet again. So there goes the entire graveyard. Take a look at the top 7. Again, choose 2.
Two more counter spells, not shabby.
Yeah. Just wants to put him in the headlock. He'll find a win condition eventually, right? And there it is.
Right on time.
Yep. There's Radiant Fountain up to 16. And there it is. Elspeth Sun's champion. 3 soldiers will accompany it. Andersen's going to sacrifice a couple of Windswept Heaths here to get some lands out of his deck.
But we have entered Chris loses even if he could stack his deck territory. Jim just has too many counter spells at this point. And the clock is really not that short, even with Chris at 26. But no reason not to play it out.
Well, it's elimination rounds. Why not play it out?
Yeah.
Dissolve will take care of the Thoughtseize. Yeah, Chris knows he's beat. We thought he might play it out, but there's really no way of getting out of this situation. We saw Jim with his Dig Through Times. He's just taking counter magic, so every card that Chris draws is going to get countered, assuming it's relevant.
Yep.
And then we just kind of go from there. So Jim Davis got to win game number 1 here over Chris Andersen. Blue-white control up a game over 4-color mid-range. We turn our attention to the sideboards. And we will start with Chris, where he actually does get some help.
Well, he does. He's got 2 copies of Glare of Heresy, 2 copies of Treasure Cruise, 3 copies of Drowned Sorrow, 2 Disdainful Stroke, a Thoughtseize, 2 Negates, a Banishing Light, a Suspension Field, and a Pharika God of Affliction. I think the Pharika is good, the 2 Negates are good, the additional Thoughtseize, the 2 counter spells, for example, the Negates and Disdainful Strokes, and the 2 copies of Treasure Cruise. This is all good stuff. The problem that I have here is, again, he's not really diversifying his portfolio of aggression. He's just bringing more creatures to the table, with the exception of Pharika. There's no Planeswalkers here. So the counter spells, the card drawing, and all that stuff, that's helpful. It does improve the matchup here. But I think Chris would be better served in this matchup if he had access to something that could really change up his mode of attack, Planeswalkers especially.
Yeah, that's the thing he just doesn't really have. I mean, he definitely has some cards that are nice. I like Disdainful Stroke, I like Negate, I like Farika, I like Treasure Cruise, all those cards that you mentioned, the additional Thoughtseize too, but coming from different angles is something he's just really not able to do.
How does his deck get better against End Hostilities post board? It doesn't really. He gets to counter it. He might be able to draw cards with Treasure Cruise to push through it. But in terms of, how much does it matter every time it resolves, Chris is not doing a lot to mitigate it.
Other side of things for Davis, you see the 2 Omen Speakers, 2 Erase, a Faded Retribution, a Last Breath, 2 Negates, 3 copies of Burmaz, 3 Glare of Heresy, and a Whelming Wave. There's some nice options here for Jim. I do like Glare of Heresy a little bit here, at least in some numbers, and I love the Faded Retribution.
Faded Retribution here is great, and I think the 2 Negates can come in here as well. Even though Chris does not have many spells in his main deck, only a total of 8, post-board you have to anticipate that you're going to be seeing Thoughtseize, an additional copy, 2 Negates, 2 Disdainful Strokes, and 2 Treasure Cruises at the minimum. So, and those spells are really high impact as well. So I think we can expect the Negates to come in.
Solid options here for both players, but nothing I think that tilts the matchup one way or the other. Like, I think Jim is already favored. I don't think there's anything here that really tilts the matchup heavily in Chris's favor, or anything from Jim that says, oh, well, I was already ahead, well, this one's over.
Chris definitely upgrades his deck. I mean, he adds some power, he gets some reasonable answers to some of the troublesome spells in Jim's deck, but I don't think that a lot of the systemic problems in the matchup get addressed. He just adds power to his deck. That's a fine starting point, but I still think Jim has a comfortable edge, even though Jim really isn't bringing a lot to the table, as you mentioned. It's a lot of the same stuff.
Well, game number 2 is going to be underway here in just a moment between these 2 players, but we will talk about Cardboard Crack, 3 different paperback book available. Look like a 4th one is going to be on the way, on sale now.
Extremely well received, of course, known more for its being an online comic strip, but now available in paperback form. All 3 copies available on Star City Games right now for $12.99 a piece. StarCityGames.com/cardboardcrack to order your copy today.
Davis going to be on the draw. Andersen going to be on the play here for game number 2. See, these guys are pretty familiar with each other, and I think by now everyone's familiar with Jim Davis and the blue-white control deck that he is piloting. Only one to really be doing this. Again, you remember during Season 4 early on, Jeremy Bylander, 2nd place finish at the Open Series in Minneapolis, put this blue-white control deck on the map. It was very surprising to see that deck there. We're thinking, well, maybe it was just a fortunate performance from a really, really good player, but Jim Davis kind of picked up on that deck and has been running with it. And again, top 4 at our Season 4 Invitational in Seattle a couple weeks ago, Players Championship performance, and now elimination rounds here in what is a favorable matchup. Could be another semifinals appearance here for Jim.
If your deck is a bunch of mid-range creatures and spot removal, which sort of defines a lot of the decks in Standard, they all have their own nuances, they all have their own little things going on, but a lot of the decks are creatures and removal spells, and they're not particularly fast creature decks. And if that's your game plan, this blue-white control deck is going to be all sorts of trouble. People are obviously not building their deck with End Hostilities in mind, at least game 1, because very few people have it. And they're playing a lot of creature removal because so many of the decks, they're Siege Rhino decks, they're Goblin Realm Master decks, they're Butcher of the Horde decks, they're Devotion strategies. Creature removal across the board is going to be pretty potent, but not against Jim's deck.
Well, Jim is going to take a break, and Chris is looking a little hungry right now. So we'll have more of that match for you guys in just a moment here. But while we do wait, can't update you guys on exactly what's happening elsewhere. Rudy Briska, Matt Andersen, they're in game number 3 right now. It's going to be our backup match. If we have time to jump that way, we will. Briska playing Abzan Reanimator, Andersen playing red-white tokens. Of course, we saw Jim Davis win game number 1 over Chris Andersen. Blue-white control up a game over 4-color mid-range. Bruce Edelman playing Jeskai tokens against Stephen Mann playing white-blue heroic. No update on that for you guys just yet, but when we have one, we'll let you know. And then Joe Lissette in the heroic mirror against Logan Mize. Lissette up a game as he's the number 2 overall seed. He got to play first, and I agree with you. I think it's going to be Lissette 2-1 in that match because he's going to win game number 1 where he was on the play, and he'll win game number 3 where he is presumably on the play.
Things can happen, and the white-blue heroic deck has enough variance rolled in just with, do you have a creature in your opening hand? And then post-board, you also worry about Glare of Heresy. So it's not enough to have a creature yet to be able to win the fight over that card, but it is very play-draw biased. I mean, both decks make it so it's very hard to block. They have no removal. The only interaction, if you can call it that, really is life gain and the couple copies of Glare of Heresy. So it's something that biases very much towards who's on the play, and Joe Lissette as the second overall seed has a pretty big edge.
We just found out right now that Bruce Edelman does win his match over Stephen Mann 2-0. So Jeskai Tokens takes down White Blue Heroic. Edelman will play the winner of Lissette and Mize. So no matter what, Edelman's going to be playing against Heroic again. May have gotten a good side of the bracket.
Well, it's going to depend a lot on who comes out of that match, because if it's Joe, as we predict, Joe will be on the play in the top 4. And although the Tokens versus White Blue Heroic matchup is not as extreme as the White Blue Heroic mirror, it's still, in my opinion, very biased towards who's on the play.
I want to give a shout out to Stephen Mann on what's been a really good couple of weeks for him. The Season 4 Invitational did not go as expected, obviously. We all know that story, though Dylan Donegan was able to win the tournament. So that's why Mann was able to play in the Players' Championship, made the most out of that weekend. One of the last 8 players standing was into day 2 competition. But we can't forget as well that the Standard Open, our first 2-day Standard Open, 20K, it took place in Seattle during that Invitational, and he made the top 8 of that with Abzan. Now he's made the top 8 of this one with White Blue Heroic. He is kind of quietly, because he's not a very loud guy, is really putting up some solid results here in the Open Series, and he wants to qualify for that Players' Championship again. That's why he flew from Florida up here for this one. And truth be told, I wouldn't be surprised to see him in Philadelphia next weekend with this Team Redelver deck doing his thing.
So there's a couple ways that you can become noteworthy as a Magic player, become publicly visible. Streaming helps, certainly winning helps, being a loud personality helps, being known for playing the same deck over and over again helps. There's all these factors that go into how visible someone is.
Yep.
But, if you're introverted, if you mix up your decks a lot, if you're not generating content, even if you're winning a lot, you can fly under the radar. And Stephen Mann, as you mentioned, has had a bunch of great results in the Open Series last year, did well at the Players' Championship, a Pro Tour top 8 to his name. He's a very, very good player. Yeah. And of any of the matches we've watched so far this weekend, his Game 3 against Jim Davis stands out to me as by far the best individual game someone played. Yeah. He's an excellent Magic player. And because of all the other things that are kind of going around on the outside, the personality, the lack of playing the same deck over and over again, not really public-facing in any real respect besides results, he flies under the radar, but he's an incredible Magic player. And I think that if you have not had an opportunity, going back and watching Game 3, his match against Jim, I don't know if there's another player in the room here this weekend that wins that game with the cards drawn on Jim's side and the cards drawn on Stephen Mann's side. Just an incredible performance, another very good finish, and hopefully we'll see him in Philadelphia next weekend.
It's no accident that he has as many Open Series points that he does, that he comes to these tournaments with 2 buys. He's obviously going to move up the leaderboard now, given the performance this weekend. And again, I know it's very important for him to qualify for the Players' Championship yet again, and he wants to get it done in Season 1. So I have a feeling we're going to see him quite a bit. I know we're not going to the Florida area as far as location is concerned, but he's shown a willingness to travel to Open Series events to try to get the job done. And Philadelphia, we have seen him in that area before. We're going to be in Indianapolis in a couple weeks to see as well. A lot of tournaments to be played in Season number 1. I wouldn't be surprised to see him at quite a few of them.
And, frankly, you got 2 buys. It's a lot of money for first prize.
Yep.
You always have the IQs on Sunday as a backup plan.
Yep.
It's a lot easier to rationalize a large travel schedule for the Open Series now than it has been at any other point.
Yeah.
And with the Players' Championship as the big prize at the end of the year, I would not be surprised to see him traveling to a lot of these Opens.
Yeah, and it's funny because we talk about the players who were probably the best ones coming in to the Players' Championship. Reed Duke, Tom Ross, right at the top of the list. Brad Nelson, Brian Braun Gerard Fabiano coming off his Grand Prix win in Baltimore the week before that tournament. I don't know how many people picked Steve Mann to maybe make those final 8 competitors, but he is certainly a force to be reckoned with in that particular tournament. And he battled hard, walked away with $2,000 there, and I expect to see more of the same and more performances from him. Of the players, the 16 that played in the Players' Championship, he had the most Open Series top 8s of the year out of them. So his results really do speak for themselves, even though they aren't loud results.
And a lot of players playing in the Players' Championship attended more Opens than he did.
Yeah.
It wasn't like Stephen was traveling all around and playing in every single Open. I am positive there are players who competed in more Opens than Stephen did and had fewer top 8s. And again, we're talking about the Players' Championship field, the people who are the most consistent performers on the Open Series. And by percentages, I'm sure Stephen had one of the best performances, if not the best performance, of anyone in that tournament.
Very, very skilled player. We'll hear more from him, but not this weekend. And Bruce Edelman was able to take him down again. He'll play the winner of Joe Lissette versus Logan Mize. One of those players both those players, playing Heroic, one of those players is going to make it through to play against Edelman in that match. Edelman's the number 3 overall seed, so he's probably rooting for Mize to maybe break serve here. Mize is the 7, Lisette is the 2. So Lisette wins that match, he'll get to play against Edelman. On the other side of things, Briska versus Andersen, they're still doing battle, and I believe Andersen versus Davis is just about ready to go here. Again, Davis playing blue-white control, Chris Andersen playing 4-color mid-range. I, of course, implore you to check out the deck tech that we did with Chris Andersen. This deck is very, very innovative. It's great in this particular format. I think Chris is in a very difficult matchup right now, but you don't see a lot of people playing blue-white control on the Open Series or just kind of in general in this particular format. You see a lot more Whip of Erebos and mid-range style decks, and this might be the king of mid-range moving forward.
Yeah, and I think that we might see an uptick in blue-white control, and I think part of the reason we haven't seen it very much is people are spoiled. I mean, people are still living in Ravnica world where they're looking at deck lists where you're playing, you have to play with Devouring Light instead of Azorius Charm. You have to play with Jace's Ingenuity instead of Sphinx's Revelation. And you say to yourself, why would I ever bother playing a deck like this? And I think one of the big incentives is right now the field is ripe for it. I mean, there's so many decks where they're 3 and 4 and 5 mana creatures and creature removal spells. They all have their nuances, they all have their subtle differences, but that's essentially what's going on here. And we've seen Jim have so many matchups where someone goes turn 1-0, turn 2-0, turn 3 Courser, turn 4 Siege Rhino, that gets countered.
Yeah.
And they already have a Murderous Cut, a Hero's Downfall in their hand. Jace's Ingenuity resolves, the board gets swept up, and even though the components of Jim's deck substantially less powerful than the last blue-white control deck that we saw, the metagame is a lot more robust for this sort of strategy because people are playing with 8, 10, 12 copies of creature removal spells in their main deck. They're playing with 3 or 4 or 5 mana creatures, and hostilities backed up by a couple counter spells and a lot of card drawing is a fundamentally sound plan against those kind of decks. Yeah. So I think that blue-white control, even though way less powerful than his previous iteration, there's a lot of stuff going around on the periphery of the standard metagame that makes it a sweet choice, even if maybe it's a little bit less powerful.
Update for you guys, while we do wait for Jim to return, Matt Andersen does win the match over Rudy Briska. So Red-White Tokens takes down the player who probably had the most dominant run over the course of this week, and Rudy was destroying everyone he played against with his Abzan Reanimator deck.
8-1 at the end of day 1. Handed the loss to our last undefeated player in the tournament, and was in a position to draw, and I believe maybe with 2 rounds to go or 1 round to go, but he was definitely top of the Swiss most of day 2 and was really happy with the deck that he played.
Yeah, he played Abzan Reanimator, but he was taken down by Matt Andersen playing Red-White Tokens. Again, a deck that Sam Black did popularize at the World Championships, at the Season 4 Invitational where he made the top 8. It's funny because that's another deck that we don't really hear a lot about. We don't hear a lot about blue-white control. We don't hear a lot about red-white tokens, but their results, they really do speak for themselves. There aren't a lot of people playing that deck or these particular decks in blue-white control or red-white tokens, but when they are getting played, they do win.
Oh yeah, there's room for a ton of decks in Standard right now.
That's what makes the format so awesome, is that it's very clear that this format is not solved. It's not just, all right, I guess I have to play Pack Rat or Master of Waves. I don't really have much of a choice. Perhaps Sphinx's Revelation, but if you're trying to cast Blue Chronos, you might as well get out of here. That's not the case here, and it's crazy to think that the format is not solved, and a new set is coming out in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, to shift everything up that is still in the process of being shifted around.
Well, these players will finish shuffling up, and game number 2 is going to be underway here. Matt Andersen, Bruce Edelman, they're through, taking out 2 of the bigger names in the top 8, Rudy Briska and Stephen Mann. Lisette still battling against Mize, and now Andersen will do battle here against Davis in game number 2.
So Chris's sideboard makes a lot of sense to me because given what his deck is trying to do, having, say, a random Nissa is really incongruous with the rest of this deck's plan. But I just don't know if it's enough help in this matchup. Though Jim taking a mulligan, of course, very helpful.
We have seen him do this a couple of times today. He's had to mulligan to 5 a few times and had a very competitive match when he did mulligan to 5 against Briska earlier in the day. A time we thought he's allowed Rudy to win that game and move on. But Jim, not really, doesn't feel forced to having to keep maybe sketchy 7-card hands. He doesn't mind mulliganing with this deck. This deck does have, Divination and Jason Ingenuity Dig Through Time. It can undo a mulligan pretty well.
Yeah, it's very robust. A lot of card drawing, a lot of lands. No one likes to mulligan, but we saw Jim mulligan to 5. He ended up losing, but his hand was totally functional. Made land drops, drew some cards, and was right back in it.
Played a long game.
Yeah.
Surprise, surprise. Logan Mize did win game number 2 here over Joe Lisette. Logan was on the play game 2 in the Heroic Mirror. That's probably why he won it. And they'll be playing a third game over there. We might be going to a third game here soon, too, as Davis is going to take a mulligan to 5.
And being robust with mulligans, I think, is something that people don't necessarily appreciate. It was a huge part of the power of Cobblade, for example. Not to compare Jim's deck in terms of power level, but because Squadron Hawk, Jace, Stoneforge, Mystic, you had all these sources of card advantage, you could mulligan to 5 and still easily overpower people because so many of the cards in your deck were worth multiple cards. And you just pick up a lot of percentage points where, you know, when Jim's opponent mulligans to 5, Jim almost certainly wins, and that's going to happen a percentage of the time.
Yep.
And when Jim mulligans to 5, it doesn't doom him, and you pick up percentage points just because there's variance in Magic, and people are going to mulligan sometimes.
It's all part of it. See if Davis can find a 5 that he likes here, though, after shuffling up. Andersen has his 7. And this might be exactly what Chris needs to get back into this thing. Some untimely mulligans. Still love the matchup for Jim, though. I mean, 5 cards is tough, obviously, and we'll see if his hand comes together appropriately, but I still think the matchup is very good.
Chris is still unlikely to pressure him. It does magnify the value of his Thoughtseize, though. I mean, Jim might get a hand where he really needs a Divination to resolve. He really needs a Dissolve to protect himself for a while, and if Chris has Thoughtseize backed up by pressure, Jim may not be able to handle it on 5 cards.
Opulent Palace is how Andersen will start things. See, Davis with just a flooded strand. Andersen will play another Opulent Palace and pass the turn back over to Davis. Davis will draw a card. He does have lands. Temple of Enlightenment is another one. So mulligan to 5 is not the end of the world here for Jim.
He's got lands, he's got Dissolve, a Jace's Ingenuity, a Banishing Light. This is a functional 5-card hand. Still needs help. Still very vulnerable to Thoughtseize. But I think he's going to get to play.
Elspeth was the top card with Temple of Enlightenment. It is now the bottom card. Opulent Palace to draw here for Andersen. He will play that and just pass the turn back. Davis has been given enough time to play this game. Dissolve the draw. It's not shabby. Radiant Fountain's going to come down. Davis is going to go up to 22. You mentioned how Andersen's deck doesn't really put a lot of pressure on, and with a no mana accelerant draw, we're playing a pretty fair game here. There's Windswept Teeth. That'll likely search up a Plains, and we'll see what Andersen has to play.
I mean, honestly, I know Jim's on 5 cards, but if you asked me to wager on who's going to win this game, I would take Jim. I think these Dissolves and Jace's Ingenuity and Banishing Light, it's going to be really hard for Chris to muster enough in time. Now, if Chris draws his high-impact sideboard cards, his Negates, his Treasure Cruises, his Thoughtseizes, that changes things. But if he's just drawing his Game 1 cards, I think he's in trouble.
Here's it easy. Well, that's going to get countered pretty quickly. Davis is going to sacrifice his Flooded Strand. He'll get an island out of his deck. That'll allow him to cast Dissolve and do a little scrying here.
Which is great for Jim because he's in the hunt for more land drops and more card drawing.
Yeah, the big thing here for Jim is he just needs to resolve that Jace's Ingenuity. That's such an important spell for him. There's the Dissolve. Take a look at the top card. And it's going to remain on top. So we're going to head back Davis's way. Picked up a copy of Temple of Enlightenment. Not bad.
Still lets him hold up Dissolve, improve his draw step a little bit. It's the 5th land for Jace's Ingenuity.
That one's going to stay on top. We'll go back Andersen's way. Andersen will untap those 4 lands and take a draw. Glare of Heresy. Andersen's hand a little more reactive than I bet he would like right now. Here's an attempt at Sidisi. Chris.
Directly into the graveyard again?
Casting it into the graveyard. Has a feeling. He knows he's playing against a deck that has a lot of counter magic, so there's Dissolve. See if Jim wants to move his card that's on top. He already knows what it is. He's going to pass the turn back, so he's happy with what it is. It's a copy of Nullify. Now, what's interesting here is if Jim is going to take the opportunity to cast his Jace's Ingenuity right away when Chris's mana was down, because Chris does have Disdainful Stroke after sideboard.
And Negate as well.
Yes.
But it is very risky for Jim to put his shields down there because Chris might be able to resolve something quite large.
And there's Sidisi again. He'll cast it in the graveyard again. Jim may be fine with letting this resolve. I mean, he does have a copy of Nullify. And, you know, when your opponent casts their cards in the graveyard, you do feel like you're maybe being baited a little bit, right?
A little bit, although it's consistent with Chris's body language so far of, yeah, I'm kind of hopeless. Yeah, I can't really do anything about this. It could be a little bit of a bait, but Chris has set it up over the last couple of turns.
There's Nullify to take care of that. Andersen will just pass the turn back. So Davis will draw. It's a Tranquil Cove. That'll come into play. He's up to 21. And even though his Jace's Ingenuity is likely not to resolve, he's got to be thrilled with where he's at in this game.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like we're playing top of deck to top of deck, and Chris just doesn't have a lot going on.
Yeah, now he's just got a boring old Wingmate Rock. He's going to take one to cast, it looks like. Jim going to cast Jace's Ingenuity. Chris will Disdainful Stroke it. So you see the board here. Andersen with a Glare of Heresy in hand, a Wingmate Rock in play. Davis with a Banishing Light in hand, along with a Tranquil Cove. That's it.
I know there were some risks associated with tapping out for Jace's Ingenuity, but I wonder if Jim would have been better served, just because it feels like when you bulk into 5, it's so important to get that first big card draw to resolve.
Especially for his deck. Now, what gets really interesting is how does he want to use this Banishing Light. Clearly, he's not willing to use it just yet. So Andersen's going to draw a card. He's tapping mana on his turn. It's a Satyr Wayfinder, which means he'll turn over the next couple of cards. Yavimaya Coast, Sansep Citadel are the options as far as lands are concerned. Thoughtseize and Sidisi will go to the bin. That's all 4 Sidisis for the game. Chris will play the land. He won't get to attack with the 1/1, but the 3/4 can come in. Trigger gain a little bit of life. Davis will go a little bit lower.
I'm curious how many copies of Glare of Heresy did Chris bring in here? He's got 2 in his sideboard. I suspect if he brought in 1, he's probably brought in the other, but definitely the type of effect you can easily draw too much of.
Radiant Fountain the draw. That'll undo a little bit of the damage that Wingmate Rock just dealt. And we're going to head back over to Andersen. In for 4. Little life gain from the rock. And we go back over to Davis. Banishing Light was the draw. He'll just pass the turn back. Thoughtseize is what Andersen has picked up for the turn. Shrugs his shoulders and says, sure. 2 Banishing Lights. Jim will discard one of them. Here's the attack. Davis will take 4 more. Pearl Link Ancient to the draw. Not a bad one.
Nope.
Actually, a pretty good one.
Was not sure if Jim was going to leave that card in his deck. He would be try to win exclusively with Elspeth.
Interesting draw here from Andersen. It's a copy of Soul of Theros. There's the attack. Jim, not going to take. I was wondering if he was going to take the opportunity to try to get him.
No real reason not to.
It's basically a freebie. Dave's going to take 3 points of damage in the air. And now Andersen take the opportunity to cast this Soul. So there that is. And we will head back Davis's way.
And now this Glare in Chris's hand looks real good.
Yeah, it really does.
Because Jim will probably have the Banishing Light, the Soul of Theros.
Radiant Fountain the draw. Yeah, his hand's almost forced now, right? Like, he gets the opportunity to say, okay, I'll play Banishing Light on the Soul. Trigger Prowess, get in the red zone. That's an option here. He could also play defensively a little bit Pearl Lake, but I'm not sure where that gets him.
He still needs to contain the Wingmate Rock, so he can Banishing Light that, though then the ground gets a little mucked up.
And there is the Banishing Light.
But because he has so many lands that gain life, assuming this Banishing Light is good, we know it's not, but assuming it was good, Jim probably could navigate the damage range just by banishing Radiant Fountains.
Oh, absolutely. Andersen will draw a card. Wingmate Rock is a pretty nice one.
Well, this is shaping up to be a really nice turn. The question is, how much does he want to extend? Because if he empties out here, and Jim draws and hostilities, Fated Retribution.
Given Chris's ability to basically try to get this game over with now, I don't mind this play.
It's 9 points in the air against an opponent at 9.
Well, an opponent that might be going to 10 or 11, depending on what lands Davis wants to pick up, since he has the option to do this, which is attack you, get you for 6 points of damage, pick up 3 lands. You know, recast my Pearl Lake, pick up 3 lands, replay a land, stay alive a little longer.
Yeah, it is not necessarily lethal. Jim can fend it off for 1 turn, but Chris is way ahead in the race at this point. He's going to get 2 Wingmate Rock triggers and attack for 9 in the air. So Chris can keep the glare in hand in case Jim finds a sweeper, and then he can unlock the Soul of Theros and go from there.
There's Glare of Heresy.
This is another route where he can activate the Soul of Theros, and that is lethal.
And he sees it right away, and that'll take care of it. Chris Andersen's going to win game number 2 here against Jim Davis, 4-color mid-range. Ties it up here against blue-white control. You see the sideboarding options, and Jim is going back to his deck box very quickly. Must not like his configuration.
Curious to see what he didn't like here.
See the options available at Jim. 2 Omen Speakers, 2 Erase, that Fated Retribution, which you have to imagine is in his deck. Last Breath, 2 Negates, 3 Ramaz, 3 Glare of Heresy, and a Whelming Wave. I imagine that Glare of Heresy and Fated Retribution are in.
Yeah,
Not sure what else, though.
I guess the question is, you know, do you reevaluate Banishing Light now, knowing that Chris has brought in the Glares? I suspect the answer is no, just because Jim doesn't have a lot of great options to bring in.
Perhaps he's bringing in Negates to counter Thoughtseize and Glares.
I think Negate should have been in his deck in game 2. If maybe it wasn't, but
Okay.
Chris has so many good spells in the sideboard. I mean, you know, Thoughtseize, Glare of Heresy, Treasure Cruise, Negates, Disdainful Strokes. Most of Chris's sideboard, I understand Chris doesn't have a lot of spells in general, but the creatures that are in Chris's deck, that's the easy part of the matchup for Jim to answer. It's the spells that are going to make things challenging.
So both players taking a look at the deck list, see if they want to change anything now that they're working with virtually perfect information. Not entirely sure how your opponent will sideboard against you, but you know the options available, so that's certainly a big deal here. Dave is someone who did have a lot of success qualifying for our Players' Championship and just keeping up with the Open Series points race with our IQs. And of course, you can run an IQ in local stores near you. All you have to do is contact Star City Games. It's pretty easy to do, and there's a lot of sweet stuff that goes along with it.
Yeah, you can check out the Playmats, dice bags, pins, SCG premium vouchers, cash prizes, Open Series points. It's been a road for so many players to qualify for the Invitational. Just be more local OP at your store and a path to Players' Championship for a couple players, including Jim Davis.
You know, we've got 2 IQs happening right now. We've got 3 different types of them. We've got, of course, just our normal ones, Super Ones and Premier Ones. 2 Premier Ones taking place at every Open Series event here in 2015. Whatever the main event is, the other 2 IQs won't be. So, for example, we got a standard one happening right now. That means we got our standard 2-day event happening right now, which means our 2 Premier IQs, Modern Legacy. Next weekend when we're in Philadelphia, we'll have a Legacy 2-day 20K, which means our Premier IQs will be standard and modern. And our modern turnout here, very impressive. 250 players doing battle.
It was definitely the current concern we heard most expressed when we announced that we were changing this format is, I'm a big fan of Format X. What's going to happen the weekends where the Open Series is Format Y? And you always have a tournament to play in. And if you specialize in particular formats, you will have more 20K tournaments to play in this year. For example, we're going to have a Modern Open Series event. That's the first time that's ever happened. That's going to be in Baltimore.
That event's going to be sweet.
I mean, if the turnout for GP Richmond was any indicator, and Richmond and Baltimore very close to one another, then I would expect the turnout in Baltimore to also be quite high.
Yeah, me too. I think that tournament is going to be sweet, sweet, sweet. We'll see if the format looks the same then as it does right now with Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time and Friends. Jeskai Ascendancy as well.
I suspect we're going to see some bans. Just because now that's a Pro Tour format, it's too risky from Wizards, R&D's, OP's perspective. If the same decks from the World Championships are the same decks that everyone sees all day long at the Pro Tour.
I agree.
I think if there was no Pro Tour and Modern was just a Worlds format, it would be reasonable to, I would reasonably guess there would be no bannings. But because it is a Pro Tour format and they're concerned about the coverage, I think that's going to tip the scales. I think at the minimum, Treasure Cruise is going to go, and I think there could be bannings beyond that.
I think you're right.
That's my guess. Happy to be proven wrong. We'll see how it goes, but if you ask me to wager on it, that would be my guess.
Something's going to change, but just don't know what. And Favorite Forge could bring some nice cards along with it, too.
That's true. But Modern is a really large card pool.
Yeah.
And unless Favorite Forge has a better Lightning Bolt, a better Mana Leaf, a better Remand, a better Delver of Secrets, a better Gataxian Probe.
Don't give him any ideas, man.
Yeah.
Don't give him any ideas.
There's a risk of stagnation. A better Birthing Pod.
Please, no. Can we reprint Force Spike? Or is that one too good?
Too much splash damage.
Yeah?
Force Spike is not just good against busted decks, it's also good against normal decks.
All right.
Like Stubborn Denial is a great card to print because it's Force Spike against spells, so you have a little more interaction. It also promotes creature decks. So if you want to do that sort of thing, I think Stubborn Denial is the way to do it. That's a great design.
For some reason, I like the way that Force Spike kind of contorts your play. Both like if you have it in your deck and if your opponent has to play around it. Just like, I guess I have to pay one more for everything in theory, or I don't think you have it, I'll cast my spell, Force Spike it.
As the card pool expands, decks get faster and more powerful. It's already hard enough to rationalize playing 4 and 5 mana spells. It becomes harder to do that when Force Spike is also a card floating around.
Okay.
Finally found my 4th land for Siege Rhino. Put in the graveyard with the other 3 spells I cast so far.
Evolving Wild's going to start things off here for Jim. Chris will play a forest and simply pass the turn back. Jim will sacrifice the wilds and get himself an island. So now we'll see if Chris can overcome not only Jim keeping a 7-card hand, but him being on the draw too.
And Jim looks like he has a very nice curve of counter spells. I don't think he has white mana, but he doesn't really need white mana right away.
Dissolve the draw. He does have a nice curve of counters. You are right about that. Elvish Mystic. There's a coast. Pass it back. Jason's Ingenuity to the draw. Radiant Fountain will come into play. Davis up to 22.
And this is the spot where Jim says, please cast something impactful, because he just wants to scry for land drops right now.
It's funny, I wouldn't be surprised if he countered. It's a Seder Wayfinder that Chris looks like he wants, I guess. I wouldn't be surprised if Jim counters this. Just because he wants to scry that bad. I mean, it's not a great use of Dissolve, but I wouldn't be surprised.
This still might be below the bar of counterable.
Well, he's going to take care of it. He just wants to scry that bad.
He also might sense that Chris is having some colored mana issues.
Jim going to leave the card on top of his deck. He'll take 1. And it's certainly possible that Chris does have those problems. You don't see an Opulent Palace or a Sands of Citadel in play just yet. Jim going to draw a land for the turn. It's an island. Put that into play. No white mana yet, but he's doing just fine. Force the draw here for Andersen. In for 1. He will play the force and just pass the turn back. Davis will draw. He's looking for land number 5. He has found it in Polluted Delta.
Yeah, it's not white mana, but I think Jim's happy as it is.
To be fair, Andersen does have a copy of Disdainful Stroke in hand. So he's got the counter ready for Rika the draw. But you talked about mana issues. They're certainly here.
And it wouldn't surprise me for Jim just to say, all right, I'm not going to cast anything while he's got open mana up and he can't really do anything. Chris is at risk of discarding to hand size soon.
Yeah, it begs the question, right? Okay, if I'm in Jim's situation here, it's like, okay, my opponent isn't casting any spells, so what could they have in their hand? Well, they don't have black mana, so that means they can't play Rhino Wars to DC, so perhaps the grip is loaded up with those, but I know he has some reactive spells, so I'm not going to cast a spell just yet, and he does not do that, just draws a copy of Evolving Wilds, and I like not playing a spell there.
Yeah, there's just no incentive to do so.
Nothing is forcing his hand. If we keep going like this, Jim is going to win the game.
Exactly. What's the rush on Jim's side? The more land drops he makes, the more he can overpower Chris's counterspells.
Chris is going to change his tapping for the commune. That's going to resolve. Take a look at the top couple. Manic Influence, Thoughtseize, Treasure Cruise, Soul of Theros, Thoughtseize. He'll get a Soul of Theros. The rest will go to the bin. There's the attack. And Jim's going to sacrifice a couple of lands here. So he'll have 4 cards in the graveyard. See if he does want to make a move for you. Still wants to stick and stay like he has previously.
I think from Jim's perspective, nothing's changed. He's not at risk of having to discard yet. Chris is clearly having color mana issues. When Chris draws out of it, maybe you want to make a little bit of a fight because Jim's going to make a move, and Chris rather is going to make a move, and then you can respond in kind. But for now, just allow this game to go as it's going.
Update for you on our other match. Joe Lissette does win the match 2-1. He was on the play game 1 and on the play game 3, and that was good enough to get the job done. He'll be playing against Bruce Edelman in the semifinals.
50 minutes and you may begin.
In comes the Elvish Mystic yet again. Andersen still stuck. Discard, Soul of Theros. Jim refusing to cast his card drawing spells. Draws a copy of Dissolve.
And Jim's draw steps are a lot more powerful. He has more lands, so he's less likely to have to discard. And I just love this patience. There's just no reason to do anything.
Of course, if Crew fixed the draw. It just feels like to me, hey, Chris is going to move first.
Now this, I believe, is counterspell worthy.
Me too. Now, which counterspell do you want to use between Dissolve and Nullify? Is a more interesting question, but I'm okay with this.
I think game 1, it's fine to use Dissolve in the spot because Chris doesn't really have spells you have to worry about. Post board with negates, treasure cruises, more thought seizes. I think he wants to save Dissolves. He puts a higher premium on him in the post board games than he does game 1.
What's interesting about this is that will Chris attack with the Elvish Mystic? If he attacks, Jim is going to dig through time so fast, but he won't attack. He will leave the 2 mana available. See Davis draw another copy of Glare of Heresy. But every card that goes into Davis's graveyard makes Dig 1 mana cheaper, so we could have Dig plus Counterspell. There's the attack. Davis going to go down to 15. With 5 cards in the graveyard, Dig will cost 3 mana, so we could have Dig plus Dissolve, but patience, patience, patience. Pluto Delta.
And that's a big land drop because now this allows Jim to play Jace's Ingenuity plus dig through time in the same turn, overwhelm the counterspell.
Manic Influence off the top of the deck right into play. Somebody finally has black mana. It's Thoughtseize.
And I think that Jim kind of wants to fight over these discard spells because the information is very valuable. And on top of that, I think he just wants to trade 1 for 1 as much as possible in this spot because it magnifies the power of the card drawing spells.
Yeah, I think we're going to see Dissolve here pretty easy.
Yep.
Little scry action here for Jim. Top card becomes the bottom one. Now there's the attack. Of all the times we've watched Andersen play, we've seen him be a little short on mana, but this is the first time we've really seen him have some real color issues.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to happen some percentage of the time when you're
Yeah.
playing a 4-color deck, but it's been especially pronounced this game. And That was kind of, it almost felt like that was the turn. It's that turn or bust for him to find black mana. Because if he discards the hand size again, Jim's in a position to fire off 2 card drawers and really overpower whatever defenses Chris has. Now Chris still feels like he's got a shot, even though things are not going well.
Temple of Enlightenment here for Davis's land number 8. Important for a couple of reasons. 1, land number 8 is certainly nice to have. But 2, second source of white mana. Negate the draw. More Elvish Mystic beatdown.
It's so tough. You know, if you're in Chris's seat, you almost feel like you have to leave up 2 counterspells at this stage. But if he's leaving up 2 counterspells, it means he's doing nothing else to advance his board.
It's funny, who's gonna be the one that can't be patient anymore? Enough is enough. I'm gonna play something finally. Who's gonna be that player? Will it be Jim or will it be Chris? It looks like it's gonna be Jim. He's gonna try to dig through time. Five cards now when this goes in the stack. One of which is Dissolve. He's got to work his way through the little permission that Andersen does have.
Although it's possible he doesn't fight back over this, even with the mana available. I mean, leaving up 3 mana is pretty suspicious, indicates he's probably intending on dissolving if Chris picks a fight, but... Looks like Chris is not going to pick a fight over this.
Interesting. A little surprising.
The theory I would have here, I can understand I want to leave the counter spells back in my hand so I can fight over the things that really matter. Jim's not doing anything proactive, so if he draws a bunch of cards, who cares? He might have to discard a hand size anyway. The problem is that this line of play means if Jim finds Pearl Lake Ancient, Chris is going to have no board, and Jim's going to get to untap with a handful of cards.
Pearl Lake's the one that blows up everything.
Yeah.
Can't stroke or negate that. For many reasons. Banishing Light. Take that, Elvish Mystic.
Well, I do like this play because the only thing that's allowing Chris to keep up the appearances of what this game is the fact that he's hitting for 1. It at least forces something out of Jim at some point. Now, all right, now we're back to draw go. You have no board. I have more mana and a better draw step. You have to do something sooner rather than later.
Well, he drew another Elvish Mystic. So let's go right back to it. See? Chris kind of laughing. We'll go back to this game. I don't mind.
That's not a bad draw. I mean, it's something that Jim won't counter that at least gets the ball back into Chris's court to some extent.
Jim gonna untap. 8 lands in play. He'll take a draw step. Jace's Ingenuity. See if Davis wants to cast anything here.
My guess is he just goes to hand size.
Yep, discard Glare of Heresy. A strange game. Sandstep Citadel the draw, in for 1. Jim's gonna cast Devouring Light on the Elvish Mystic.
And all this is an effort to get Chris to either counter something or get the board back to even.
Yep.
Jim's also already discarding hand size last turn, so since he doesn't have a land drop to make necessarily, it means if he draws a spell again next turn, at least he doesn't have to discard.
And he is incentivized to play a spell, I suppose. There's a Citadel. This may be an attempt at Farika that Chris will cast into the graveyard, assuming it will not resolve. Farika is something, it's so annoying.
And I would be surprised if Jim brought in his erases, because there's just not that many targets.
Yeah.
So this feels like it's probably worth a counter spell.
It feels like he gets the dissolve, right?
Yes.
It's just annoying enough. Because Chris can't even play and activate it in the same turn. because his mana is so constricted, but it is annoying enough, and you do get the scry. Top card might be staying on top.
Jim's debating between a land right now, and it's sort of this weird thing of, do I want mana or action? Before, I think it would have been easy that he would have taken the land, but now that he's cast some spells and is no longer at risk of discarding, it becomes slightly more attractive to take mana and try to get in a position where you can fire off multiple spells or win a counter war.
Let's see what Davis will draw now. End hostilities. Pass the turn back over to Andersen. The board's even. Lattimore wastes the draw. And there's Lattimore wastes. Seeing Chris's hand, he does have a copy of SCGCOL.
But every time Chris commits mana here, he's risking Jim being able to initiate a fight that Chris can't win.
Chris is going to consult his hand on how he should tap his mana for the SCGCOL. And Jim will respond in kind. Perhaps ingenuity in response. Davis does have a copy of Disdainful Stroke in hand, so he does have a pretty clean answer. There's Jason's ingenuity. So finally we will have a battle over this card drawing spell.
And with Chris running light on resources, I'm not sure that he can let this go. You know, before he was able to keep up this, I'm going to counter what matters, but this Jason's ingenuity might be what matters.
He says it's not. 3 cards coming. 2 of which are card drawing spells in Divination and Jason's Ingenuity.
And Divination's so nice here because it allows Jim to cast it without it being a big commitment of mana.
It's the perfect card drawing spell because it's basically not good enough to counter.
Yeah.
Right? Like it falls underneath Disdainful Stroke. It can't be negated, but you really want to negate my Divination instead of my real spell? Well, Divination will draw me into my real spell. So it's really tough.
And also find land shops because Jim can only leverage all these extra cards when he has more mana than Chris as well.
Jim might use Disdainful Stroke here. Yep. We'll see if Chris fights over this with a negate. Nope. And it feels like Chris is trying to keep appearances as though perhaps he doesn't have counter magic, though he is thinking a little while before letting his spells get countered, so perhaps he's trying to trap Jim with his counter magic. There's a Flooded Strand. Jim will sacrifice that. Go digging through the old deck here. He'll get a Plains.
The gap between these two decks in terms of card advantage is noticeable, to say the least.
It's night and day.
The draw-go game, even though Chris can sort of play it with his negates and his simple strokes, you can tell in practice it's a very hard position for him to take. His hand didn't really lend him any other direction to go because he was without black mana for so long and couldn't really apply any pressure, but even though he has had some counter spells, that's not sufficient.
Divination time. Good to go. 1 is Tranquil Cove, 2 is End Hostilities. Discard End Hostilities, pass the turn back. Will Davis over to Andersen. Andersen will draw. Treasure Cruise.
I mean, Chris has got some backup for this. I wouldn't be surprised to see him just fire this off right away.
Plenty of cards to delve, that's for sure. Just to figure out which ones he wants to delve away. It's funny, Chris's game plan works for a little while, but once Jim draws Prologue Ancient, the game plan is dead.
Yeah.
And Jim just hasn't found it yet. Now, to be fair, he only plays one, and we're assuming that it's in his deck after sideboard. But once he finds it, this plan goes up in smoke. There's a negate, so we're going to have a fight over Treasure Cruise. At least it feels that way. Negate back Will Andersen. He wants these 3 cards badly.
His hand right now, there's nothing going on. And he's got to get something going proactive.
The way that Davis's hand is set up right now, too, he doesn't have the ability to say, okay, you know what? If Treasure Cruise resolves, I will resolve my Jason's Ingenuity. He only has 4 mana left over, so Andersen will get to draw 3 cards for just 1 mana. Though a pretty poor 3. Just 2 lands in Windswept Heath and Sandstorm Citadel, and then a Satyr Wayfinder, so perhaps a bullet dodge there. There is the Wayfinder. That'll resolve. Here are a couple of cards. 2 Oppium Palace, a Commune with the Gods, and a Courser. Oppium Palace will go to the hand, the rest will go to the graveyard. The Palace will come into play. And we're going to go back Jim Davis's way.
But Chris with no blue mana available. So Jim knows he's got a free pass to do whatever.
Radiant Fountain playing the role of a double time walk here. Jim might also take the opportunity here to either resolve Elspeth or to resolve Jason's Ingenuity. Now that the blue mana's down, window's open.
I don't know if he wants it to be Jason's Ingenuity because he's at 7 cards in hand, so he goes into 9, ends up discarding the hand size, and he's already, I mean, I wouldn't say it's fair to say he's light on resources, but I guess because he has Glare of Heresy, and if he draws extra mana, that's useless. It's not a big cost for him to cast this.
Yeah, he goes from, he had 7 cards you mentioned, down to 6, up to 9. Play a land will put you to 8. Still have to discard probably 1 card in this exchange. Dig Through Time, Disdainful Stroke, Flooded Strand with the draws. All pretty powerful cards.
Yeah, and you know, he gets to discard either a Glare of Heresy that's not up to much or a land.
Yeah.
So I guess the cost is fairly low at the end of the day.
Could discard End Hostilities too. I feel like you kind of always want one of those, but that's not a guarantee.
Well, it's a pretty big insurance policy because that's all that Chris's deck can do.
Yeah, just creatures.
Just put creatures on the table. He has no planeswalkers. His 1 freak is gone, so he's got to do this the hard way.
Jim discards Flooded Strand after playing Tranquil Cove. Chris will draw Caves of Koilos. It's a grind, but it's a grind that favors Jim, I think. There's a Caves.
Legacy Premier IQ players, your pairings for the final round of Swiss and the standings after round 7 have been posted in the hallway.
There's Wingmate Rock.
Offering your opponent anything for a concession or determining your match of Magic 3D.
Are we going to go through time, perhaps?
That seems like a good spot to initiate a Dig Through Time.
I Dig Through Time here to initiate and to draw a counter if my opponent has one.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't really need Dig Through Time to resolve. So it's kind of the perfect card to draw a counter spell if Andersen has one, and Chris is going to use his Disdainful Stroke. And now you can kind of look at things. Of course, we can see Chris's hand, so we know there's basically no counter magic over there. I think he's actually on empty as far as counter magic is concerned, but as there's Disdainful Stroke to take care of that. Now Jim knows, okay, 2 of the counter spells are gone. I'm probably good to go now. There's Disdainful Stroke. Because again, he didn't need that Dig Through Time. His hand's already pretty good.
He would like more information about whether or not he's going to fight over the Wingmate Rock. It's not a bad spot to pick a fight. If it resolves, great. If it doesn't, you know, not the end of the world. By a large margin, the cards he cares about in Chris's deck right now are either the counter spells or the discard spells. So anytime he gets one of those out of his hand for a non-essential spell, Jim's got to be pretty happy.
Certainly doesn't really care about the creatures.
In fact, he may open this up with another copy of Jason's Ingenuity.
Wouldn't surprise me.
Legacy Premier IQ
There's Radiant Fountain, he's up to 13.
The double time walk, as you mentioned.
Yeah, ever heard of it? Time stretch, your turn.
Really potent in this spot.
Please bring your deck to the judge who is going to be sitting behind in the judge
There's
area
Elspeth.
to the left of the main event stage.
Well, there's Disdainful Stroke. So Andersen did have another piece of counter magic.
Please bring your deck to the judge.
But again, this is a situation where Chris has to kind of counter that card, given his hand. He's got 2 lands and a Glare of Heresy. And Jim can just say, you know what? Okay, that means Jason's Ingenuity is probably good to go. And perhaps I care about that card more than anything. So,
I mean, Chris could have let that resolve and then glared it, but I guess his thinking is I might not even be able to beat 3/1/1s.
and yeah, he might have a cheap counterspell for Glare, like Negate.
Exactly.
And then I can't win.
Your Disdainful Stroke can't fight a counter war over Jim's counterspell, but it can fight straight up against the Elspeth.
Yeah.
But now Chris Odd lands a Glare of Heresy and nothing else.
The mighty Satyr Wayfinder. Don't sell the little guy short. He'll beat you down. Let's see what his draw step is. Plains. Chris trying to represent strength here as best he can. There's the Sandstep Citadel. There's an attack for 1. Davis is going to go down to 12. Has just undone 1/2 of the Radiant Fountain. And unsurprisingly, he's going to play Jason's Ingenuity. This is going to resolve. And if you're Jim again, you have to be pretty confident that, okay, my opponent's probably out of counter magic. Perhaps some reactive spells in hand, but it is likely they are out of counter magic.
Yeah, and so much of what Chris does is on his own main phase that, you know, it really can't be threat cards either.
And there's the big fella. Pearlic Ancient, the draw step.
Only a matter of time.
He was going to find it eventually, right?
Jim's been looking at probably an average of 6.5 cards a turn or something like that. Eventually, it's going to show up.
It's that inevitability that really gives Jim, you know, makes him the favorite in this situation for what Chris is kind of playing towards. Now, to be fair, I don't think Chris really has much of a choice to play this way given the texture of his hand, but that's the kind of game breaker that Jim has, that he can't do anything about it.
Yeah, I mean, Chris can only fight on so many fronts when he has no pressure.
Yeah.
That's ultimately what this comes down to.
Jim going to take 1, it looks like. Chris going to play Glare of Heresy, go after the Banishing Light. See if Jim cares about that. Does have a Dissolve in his hand.
I think that you can let Chris have his Elvish Mystic back is how I feel.
Oh, is that what you think? A little risque, giving him that 1/1. All right, he can have it.
Fine.
Boom. We're going to go back Jim's way. Best card on the board. Best cards in hand.
More cards in hand.
Yep. It's only a matter of time.
When someone is triggering prowess on their Pearl Link Agent with Elspeth Sun's Champion, a good sign you are in trouble.
That's exactly what you'll be doing. You do see Pearling Ancient there. This was made to be a win condition for these control decks. And while Elspeth does a fantastic job, this is an uncounterable one. Of course, Prowess, which doesn't come up a ton, but will come up right now. It's a 7/8 attacker. But my favorite part about this card is just the return 3 lands ability of it. Just kind of influences your deck building a little bit. Temples, Tranquil Cove-esque lands, Radiant Fountain as well. You get to get some value out of your big creature. So that's not so bad. Chris gonna draw a card. Courser of Crufix right on time.
Yep. Pretty powerful.
We get to take a look at the top card now. Oh, Satyr Wayfinder. Some of the cards on the battlefield are better than others.
Yeah. What do you call it? A gap in power level?
One could argue. There's a Banishing Light. That'll take care of Elspeth. Jim with Glare of Heresy in hand, so he has an answer to Banishing Light straight away. Divination too. So you know Jim's going to go 2 cards deeper into his deck now. Trigger Prowess. Hit 1 and 2. Glare of Heresy and a Tranquil Cove for the draws. Glare of Heresy will take care of the Banishing Light, which will give Jim his Elspeth back. Trigger Prowess. Pearl Lake is an 8/9. You might be setting a new record for this.
Yeah, I've rarely seen this many spells cast in one turn with a Pearl Lake.
Here come the attacks. Pearl Lake is going to eat Satyr Wayfinder. A soldier will be eaten by Courser. That damage will come across. There's a Tranquil Cove as Davis goes up to 12. For Andersen, it's been a good tournament. He'll go down to 5 here from Windswept Heath.
A great bounce back from the end of day 1. That's
Absolutely.
For sure.
And one thing to take away is this deck, I think, is legitimate. I still think there's some massaging to do as far as the numbers are concerned, but I think this deck is legitimate. In a format full of mid-range decks, Soul of Theros may be king over Whip of Erebos, and 4 copies might seem like a lot, but it's so good if you draw 1, and it's so good if you turn 1 over with Sidisi or Satyr Wayfinder. It's really hard to kind of pass up on the results that he put together here. You know, he said most of the losses were his fault. I think this one is, and I think he just ran into a bad matchup here.
Yeah, that's really what it comes down to. I think this matchup is just, it's too hard for Chris to do anything of substance.
Chris going to play a land. Might play his Courser too.
Not great operations here, but I wouldn't get too hung up on it.
At this stage in the game, I wouldn't care all that much. Jim's gonna untap his 5 soldiers. He's got Elspeth out there. He's got Nullify in hand. That'll take care of the Wingmate Rock that's on top of the deck. Here come the creatures. Elspeth will be generating more soldiers here in a moment. Now, what's really interesting is the matchup that Jim has in front of him next in Matt Andersen. Red-White Tokens is a deck that we don't see a lot of. If you read Sam Black's articles in the premium side of Star City Games, you're familiar with that. If you saw his deck list from the top 4 of the Season 4 Invitational, we were in Seattle a couple weeks ago, you're familiar with it, but we don't see a lot of this deck. So you look at 4 Goblin Round Masters, you look at 4 Seeker of the Waves, 4 Stormbreath Dragons, 2 Magma Jets, 4 Chain to the Rocks to go along with 2 Heliod's Pilgrims to find them, 4 Whirling Outburst, 4 Lightning Strikes, 4 Stoke the Flames, a Dragon's Mantle, and then 3 Chandra Power Master, 24 lands tie the room together. It does make me wonder how the matchup goes.
I think it's going to come down to a lot of how many copies of Chain of the Rocks does Matt draw game 1. You know, can he avoid the dead card issue?
Heliod's Pilgrim actually searching up Dragon Mantle is going to be the more common play, assuming that Matt is able to draw Heliod's Pilgrim. But yeah, if he fades Chain of the Rocks a little bit, yeah, there are some good cards in the matchup there. Chandra Power Master's not too bad. On the other side, of course, we'll see Joe Lisette do battle. We'll see Joe Lisette do battle against Bruce Edelman. Jeskai Tokens, White-Blue Heroic there. Joe's going to be on the play.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the big one, as you mentioned. And that was big for Joe in his quarterfinal matchup, too. See some blocks going to take place here for Andersen.
Yeah, Chris is seeing if he can get through the next turn.
It's rather unlikely, and that is going to do it. Jim Davis is going to win this match here over Chris Andersen. Blue-white control will take care of 4-color mid-range. For Davis, he moves on to the semifinals, a place that he has been with blue-white control before. And we'll see if he can get by Matt Andersen playing red-white tokens. That'll be one side of the bracket. Davis, the number 5 overall seed, so he'll be on the play there.